there are two things that just popped up on my radar. One is, this notion of the Intercept piece. Mm-hmm. When AOC came on the program, I can't remember when it was, over the summer, maybe in June. She brought up the fact, it was the first time I've heard a politician acknowledge that the Congressional Progressive Caucus is not a terribly exclusive club. They don't. It is. And it's sort of fascinating because back 15 years ago, the idea was, well, I can actually describe it to this. I can do it analogous to this. My daughter, I had her taking tests. They do in New York City, they do the gifted and talented tests. And I had her taking tests because they were low stakes in my mind. Like, I didn't care. And I was like, you're going to have to learn to do tests. Let's go take tests. And so she did really well at one point on one of these. And it gave her the opportunity to go and maybe get into Nest, which is like it's highly coveted public school in the city because you go from sorry about
Is that your ringtone?
Yeah, that is my ringtone.
How did I not know?
You go from kindergarten all the way through high school.
Right.
And one of the horrible things about New York City schooling is like each time you jump up, you have to go through a whole process. And it's a very highly coveted. But there was another school like that was on the way up in the Upper East Side. And this one's down the Lower East Side. Mm-hmm. And you got to go for an orientation. And at the Nest thing, you go and you wait in line. There was a line around the block. You get into the auditorium, and it's jam packed. And I sat in there, like I took like 2 or 3 hours to do this. I'm sitting there, and like 25 minutes into their presentation, they announced like there's 2 spots for second graders or something, and they're probably going to go to kids who have siblings. And I'm like, Jesus, like you had to come down there with documents. Yeah, because they allow siblings to go in. They give them priority to go to school with the same kids, which makes sense. I mean, that way the parents can drop off both kids at the same time. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I walk out, and you had to bring all these documents and this and that. I went to the one up in the Upper East Side. Similar dynamic, at least in terms of, I think it was K through 8, maybe not all the way through high school. But it catered to kids living in not necessarily in poverty, but lower income families. Mm-hmm. And there was like a dress code. And so I go to the orientation. I've got like all my documents, and I'm going to hand it out. And I walk up to the desk and I give them to them. They're like, we don't need to see that. And I'm like, you don't? Because I had gone through such a rigorous thing. And they're like, no, you wouldn't have showed up if you weren't eligible. Why would you do that?
Wow.
And I walk in, and there's like 25 people there. And sort of the Progressive Caucus used to be like that. There was a liability that was perceived to call yourself progressive. So why would you join the progressive thing if you weren't progressive?
Right.
And as the value of being a progressive increased, you're getting more people who are like, oh, all I got to do is cut you a check for $4,000. I'll take that branding for $4,000. Here's my check. And you have people who were literally like blue dogs. They weren't officially blue dogs, although I think you could be, who would just be like, I'm a blue dog, but I'm also in the Progressive Caucus, and because I pay my dues. And that's been a problem because you got a group of people who are supposedly the Progressive Caucus, and if they can't move as one, doesn't matter how many people are in it. If they don't function as one and they fall apart and they're working across purposes, then the cohesion of that group falls apart. And when AOC came on, she said she was the first person I've heard who's a politician who's part of that caucus who pointed that out and said that's a problem we need to deal with. And it sounds like they're starting to deal with it.
As you just said, it also disrupts their ability to have solidarity at the caucus, which makes them more powerful. So not only are these people able to get the branding, but it's actually like busting up the caucus. But I'm going to take it a little bit different, but similar point. I also think it's, there's this point where in order to build your branding, in order to build the value of a caucus or a politician's power, you build these alliances with folks and you bring them in. It's why, like, sometimes you look at Bernie's endorsements and I'm like, that person's not that progressive. What are you doing? Like, but he needed to build out his branding and his support across the board, across the country, in key demographics. But then there's a point where you don't have to do that anymore.
Right, where it becomes counterproductive.
Exactly. And where is that point? I don't know. I hope that the CPC, especially after this election, is there. And the other thing is, like, they don't even really necessarily need a huge caucus, although it's fantastic if they do. They just need to have it large enough to disrupt and push their agenda internally.
I mean, people can look at this in terms of physics, right? Like, you give me a small, very dense piece of lead, that can be more powerful than, a big, fluffy pillow, right? I mean, it's like, honestly, well, but that's the point, right? Like, right. If they can move, and if they get 10, 20, 30, 40 people, instead of, like, what is it now, 90, 100, close to that. Mm-hmm. If they get 40 people or even 25 people who vote as a block.
That's right.
You get me, you get 24 other votes because we're all on the exact same page. That becomes a very, very powerful tool because, you're going to need them. I don't know what numbers people are anticipating in the House, but it's hard for me to believe that there's going to be a Democratic majority that is going to be that can afford to lose, let's say, 25 or 40 votes. And that's how the Freedom Caucus.
Yes.
They did, it was a 2-part prong. They would, and the Freedom Caucus, nobody even knew how many people were in it.
Yeah, it was confusing because some of them didn't identify as it. Does that affect their ability to get key positions on committees and leadership? So how do you disrupt that? That obviously is where the real power lies. But
I think you need to get enough people that you can sway or reasonably be considered to sway a leadership vote. That's what it comes down to, right? Like, Are you going to, this is the one area where things become a little bit more analogous to a parliamentarian system, a parliamentary system, I should say. If you can create factions within the context of the Democratic caucus, that's when that's what I'm quite convinced that's what Pelosi, the reason why she has been so firm on the stimulus. Even though there would be benefit to people. And I want to be clear here. I am not defending her. This is, in my estimation, a bit of an indictment. That there is, in that stimulus, it is not nearly sufficient in size. It is not sufficiently targeted in terms of what Mnuchin's offering. We don't even know exactly what the details are, but we know there's some stuff in there. Right? Like, we know that there's a check to people. We know that there's an expansion of unemployment insurance. There's not probably cities and states and this and that. It's unclear to me that you're ever going to get that unless you have either a Trump win and you're not going to get it. You're not going to get what the Democrats want unless Biden wins and the Democrats win the House and the Senate. Right. And you're not going to get anything, until after the election. That's the choice. And so you go for what you can get. But the reason why she won't do that is because she doesn't want to sign on to something that leaves her committee people in the lurch. They're heads of the committees.
Who are beholden to certain interests.
Exactly.
Right.
And so aren't their members of those committees beholden to certain interests, and they want to be able to deliver that. And they're not nefarious interests necessarily. They could be.
Because they're put on those committees because of these interests.
Exactly. Right. Or because they've cultivated these interests because they're on these committees. However that worked. Mm-hmm. But, like, if I'm on the, health and human services. I may have hospitals that and my network of support is built through these networks of hospitals. If I'm on the education committee, it may be through teachers unions, et cetera, et cetera. I've got to deliver, or I've got to have a good reason why I didn't deliver. Because if other people get stuff and I don't get it, then I'm like, whoa, my supporters are like, you're the wrong person to be here, theoretically. And so Pelosi says, like, oh, nobody's going to get it because of the Republicans. And then the committee chairs are all safe. And if the committee chairs are safe, then Pelosi is safe.
Exactly.
Because they're the ones who also have like little fiefdoms.
That's right.
And their own little coalitions within the caucus. And that's the politics that's going on here.
She's an amalgamation of these committees. Like there's like a piece of her that is this committee, that committee, this, and as long as all these committees are protected by her, because that's so much of what this is about, is protection too, both ways, then she's safe. So I have a question for you. In 2017, when Tim Ryan launched his, how was he able to pull so many votes with this dynamic at play? How many did he end up getting? He got, a chunk, right?
I think there were some who were probably released on some level. I don't know. Did he really get that many votes?
I can't remember.
It seemed to me to be over before it even began. I mean,
I know he didn't have a chance, but
at that time, I was against his candidacy, or I should say, like, I was supportive of Pelosi, because I didn't think that he had the ability to do the job. I thought she was going to be better at it. But I got to say, in retrospect, I would prefer, and again, to be fair to myself, this is before 2018. So there was no squad. There was no effective pushback whatsoever. Like, I feel like I don't think they're quite there yet, but in a legitimate challenge to Pelosi, like, look, I would rather have somebody whose ideology I clearly did not agree with, like a Tim Ryan. Like, I think that I have some ideological issues with him.
Absolutely.
Who is inept than somebody who is supposedly aligned with my ideological, but is adept.
Except Justice Democrats, one of the cases that maybe this still would have happened, we can't really, entertain it, but she is a great enemy, and that mobilizes folks to support these candidates to disrupt. But if Tim Ryan were there and he appeared to be, he would be like the Obama of Congress, right?
I don't think I would be. I think he would be even more. He would appear even more of the enemy, as it was from an ideological standpoint, and he just wouldn't have control over the caucus that a Pelosi does. Now, of course, this is sort of a little bit like, if I had wings, I'd be flying type of situation. If he had more. If he had more control of the caucus, he would have won, and he would have been able to do it. And had he won, he would have been able. But I don't know.
So who would be a good progressive? That would have that ability.
That's part of the problem. Is I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know that we're there yet. I don't know that anybody's developed that type of strength yet. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know. But my point is that I would rather, in the absence of someone who could be a strong progressive leader, a Speaker of the House, I'd be willing to take a weak, non-progressive leader, right? Because that is, there's some advantage to having a weak leader if you are an insurgents in the caucus.
That's the argument about Biden, guys. That is it.
Well, I mean, we'll see.